Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer has finally announced his retirement. The oldest member of the nation's highest court, Breyer, one of 3 liberal justices left, served 27 years. Democrats had been urging him to retire while President Joe Biden remains in power and while their party holds a slim Senate majority. The president, in keeping with the campaign promise, said, quote, "The person I will nominate will be someone with extraordinary qualifications, character, experience, and integrity, and that person will be the first Black woman ever nominated to the United States Supreme Court," end of quote. Republicans and conservatives have jumped on the announcement, claiming that Biden is unfairly disqualifying whites and people of other races. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell warned Biden against nominating a, quote, radical. My guest is Dr. Judy Lubin. She is a researcher and expert on racial equity, social policy, and public health, and she's a founder and president of the Center for Urban and Racial Equity and an adjunct professor at Howard University's Department of Sociology. Welcome to the program.
Good to be here, Sonali.
So first, what do you make of the fact that Biden very clearly said at the very outset that he would be nominating a very highly qualified Black woman to the court? He spelled it out.
Absolutely, very important and significant that Biden made this commitment not only on the campaign trail, but reinforced this commitment to nominate a Black woman over just the past few days. I think this is significant for a number of reasons. First, for almost the entire history of the Supreme Court, the nominees and the justices have primarily been white men. And out of the 115 justices that have been on the court, there have not been a Black woman. And so it's long past due, overdue for a Black woman to be nominated to the court. And I think it's also significant because if we want to undo this legacy of systemic racism and patriarchy, right, that says that women aren't fit to lead and serve and to make decisions from the Supreme Court, it's time to undo, right, this legacy of sexism and racism, that we have to be explicit and intentional about undoing this legacy. And to Biden's credit, since he's been in office, he has been filling federal judge seats, half of the seats at least, with people of color, women, Black folks, Latinos, Asian judges, right? Very critical so that we build that pipeline for higher courts over time, and so that we have a diverse pool of judges to select from in the future.
Now, Slate.com's Christina Cauterucci wrote a piece entitled "How Biden's Vow to Name a Black Woman to the Supreme Court Backfired." She says a campaign promise has needlessly tokenized future nominees. What do you make of this critique?
It's critical that we needed Biden to be explicit in making this commitment. I speak to a lot of organizational leaders or leaders within companies and government agencies that say they want to diversify their leadership ranks. And then they go through an interview process, and they'll include some women, some people of color. And at the end of the day, the same pattern is repeated, and white men end up being selected. And it's not because women and people of color are not qualified. It's because people are used to making the same decisions over and over again, and they're comfortable with maintaining the status quo. And so if we really want to shift the status quo, we have to be very specific and intentional about how we're going to do that.
It seems as though, to me, the part of this that conservatives find objectionable, and we'll get to the specific objections that have been raised, is not the woman part of it, but the Black woman part of it. Because Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump both clearly said that they would be nominating women to the Supreme Court when it came to be their turn.
It is specifically that he's nominating a Black woman, right? And so there's using terms like tokenism, affirmative action, suggesting that she's going to be unqualified. No one has been named. He hasn't nominated anyone yet, but you're already hearing the bias and the racism there. There is something very specific, right, that is riling up the conservatives.
Right.
And this is all part of a larger narrative, right, that the right has been pushing for the past few years, but has really brought to a whole other level just in the past year or two with the attacks on critical race theory. This all feeds into this broader narrative that white men are being oppressed by women and women of color and people of color.
Let's actually look a little bit in depth at some of these critiques. Senator Ted Cruz said the fact that Biden's willing to make a promise at the outset that it must be a black woman, I gotta say that's offensive. You know, black women are 6% of the US population. He's saying to 94% of Americans, I don't give a damn about you. You are ineligible. Ted Cruz is offended and insulted.
I would say I'm offended, right, that there hasn't been a black woman on the Supreme Court after this length of time, right? And so it's complete hypocrisy, right? When they make nominations to the Supreme Court, they have a whole set of organizations and institutions and that solely focus on selecting judges that meet a particular set of criteria for them. Democrats can't be afraid of what the Republicans and conservatives are saying and what they're going to do, particularly with the nomination once that individual is named, right? The time is long past for a black woman to be seated on the Supreme Court. And the beauty is that there is a pool of highly qualified black women to fill the seat. The only way we create change in this country is to confront the uncomfortable and inconvenient truths and legacies of patriarchy, right? Certainly for us at CURE, at the Center for Urban and Racial Equity, the way we undo systemic racism is to remake our institutions, to rebuild them, to center equity. And the only way we get to that is to be intentional and explicit in saying that we are going to put people in positions of power that have historically not been in positions of power, because we don't get away from where we are now with such growth, inequity, and injustice if we maintain the status quo.
My guest has been Dr. Judy Lubin, researcher and expert on racial equity, social policy, and public health, founder and president of the Center for Urban and Racial Equity, and adjunct professor in Howard University's Department of Sociology.